알아도 아주베 제르미시기 아니 좀 이게 타반 가서래 동안은 저기 탑람 가라카리 아니 이게 동안을 저제 타바토비게 람 냠소 간에 가르치 량고 월에 빵고야 돼 간에 가르치 오래 니니기 파제바지 남주기 시랍 다 덴바지지 근데 니기 제바지 하고 있는데 근데 가르스는 니야 나 거기 동안 타달을 저 띵이 대화디 토고 거래 띵이 대화 토발아야 군로 안에 가서 랑직부 많이 봤음자 탐제 되게 된바다 심자 탐지 동아의 세외 체도 안에 심자 탐지 산지 고방 토벌쇼 집이 미유디 산지 고방 톱자 산지 고방 제 대토바 돈돈 예비게 돈이 군로 삼바게 오래제 다 군로 디 삼바게 제 디토네 나가서 자와 기체 디토비 돈라라 안에 개조르고 그래 사실 어두스죠 제사다 디네사다 하나 주게 지단 데 톱제 군로들이 아직 탐제 캠바 토바되어 군로 타바 토비아 군로 개와치만 운도고 바 토비아 군로 안 치디점기 되와 돈은 열제 안지 탑람 두hen 나서 예배나데 당아주 직대 먹고 발망제 돈도다 미로 지날 하이네 고아 망체와디 안 치디 디기점 주바 돈돈 열제 치디기 동아세야 된 디기 주야 돈다라 안지 군로 되네 계제 안내가 지 튕연 차상 튕연 주야다 강아세게 탑람 베제 먹고 지거올 때 이나야 안에 가브레네 탑람디 디기 주야게 삽라 디기 제보디 동아요야다 강아체야 차고래 안에 동아세에게 삽라 동아 망아용 거래세 다양 가브레 명언에 제 가브레리아 제 룩다 튕비토네 소소리아레제 지 튕연 루프테네 디기 세야다 세디기 동아세야다 디기도 탑람 지고올 때 있나 내가 병래 돼서 디기 용고를 했을 때 띵이 대화디나 띵이 동아세 투야 용고 말되는 지사 파지 돼서 대화래나야 지 교르제 동아 용고 교르제 도스는 뭐 때문에 뭐 교르고래 해서 되네 인자 먼저 군노디 샘자 탐지 산조고 뭐 토바도 군노디네 시제 디도네 개와주고 그래 해서 제가 도스는 디쇼게다 지가 니디게 돈다데 닝보를 스튜베나 데니시레스 제름치도스가 나와레스 지가 디고 시조래.
Good afternoon. This morning we started to look at this brief text by Lama Tsongkhapa. And in this he mentioned that there are various motivations, and amongst the motivations to develop the Supreme is a motivation that comes about in dependence, firstly on recognizing one's own situation, and this involves a number of topics of analysis by which one comes to recognize the various coarse and subtle ways that one experiences suffering, as well as coming to recognize the causes that lead to our suffering experiences, recognizing that it's our afflictions and the karma that they create that keep us bound, that create this prison that we are bound in, this prison of samsara, leading to a determination to gain freedom from this prison of suffering. But then, having reflected deeply on one's own situation, then lifting one's gaze and recognizing all other ordinary beings are in the same predicament as myself, yearning for happiness, yet remaining trapped in suffering realms of samsara, and thereby generate a determination to help others, to guide them to a state freed of suffering. To do this, one must become a Buddha. So thereby one generates bodhicitta and then engages in the various actions of the bodhisattva, engaging in practices such as generosity, ethics, patience, and so forth. So this is the supreme motivation, the motivation of bodhicitta, which has as its goal enlightenment in order to become the most skilled guide possible to benefit others. So in addition to this supreme motivation, there are other motivations. Another motivation which is certainly worthy, though it is lesser, is where one strives solely for one's own individual liberation, seeing Buddhahood as something beyond one's capacity, but nevertheless striving for one's own individual liberation. a motivation lesser to that, but still a worthy motivation, is one where one strives for good rebirth in one's next life, to ensure that one does not fall into lower realms, but attains a good rebirth. And then the most common motivation, the motivation of the vast majority of beings, is a motivation that doesn't go beyond this life. The focus is really just on the here and now, overcoming the problems that one encounters and trying to experience a bit more happiness, a bit more pleasure, but only within the immediate confines of this life. So this is the way of thinking that dominates the vast majority of beings. If their minds were, if they were to look at what motivates them, or what concerns their mind, what dominates their mind, it's the various problems and difficulties in their lives, and trying to experience nice pleasures, company with friends, nice meals, and so forth. Just focused on the here and now. And the problem is, they go through their life largely experiencing problem after problem, suffering upon suffering. And at times, there's some temporary respite, which would be the normal worldly happiness. But this is minor, and it never lasts. Nothing turns out to be satisfactory or enough. But for the vast majority of beings, until their outlook is raised, until they come to look beyond this life, that really is the best that can be hoped for. So we ourselves need to recognize where we individually are and strive to lift our gaze, to lift our motivation, in particular to try and cultivate a genuine motivation of bodhicitta. So this is, in brief, is what we looked at in the first 2 lines of the first verse this morning.
디기주야 동아세에 don달래야 상교고모 토고도 선비게다 군노한테는 시제 저기다 체텔이야 저기 계셔 강토도 주고 그래서 지사다 체디 튕게야다 저기 가르소르스네 냠내 약부 채발라 류디 수부디 약부 고고와 진짜 수부 약부 거래야 양지 델리 최비 칼라다 지간도 강한 마체기 송급제 튕겐디에 체딜에 튕기되 고고와 지산디 자다 당을 튕겐디게 대주기 조 아니 제 심제 탐주 상요고바 토의 미유샤제 디던달에 네 게죠 주기 산비게 삼다장서 다 삼노나리아 게비 삼노 강투도 강망마제데다 아주 냠는 제디 어두스치는 아주 도 제화데 디레서 지금 뭐지 디르와다
For practitioners who have a genuine motivation of bodhicitta, as well as those who are trying to develop this motivation where they are driven by a deep compassion to help others gain freedom from their own afflictions, and to do so, they need to attain Buddhahood. So with that motivation, to whatever degree of sincerity it arises, or spontaneity it arises, such a practitioner will still need to make sure that they have all the various ordinary favorable circumstances that are required to sustain one's life and to live a life of relevant comfort and ease, so that they can put time and energy into achieving that goal. So therefore, with a motivation to become a Buddha for the sake of others, such a being will ensure they have sufficient nutritious food, suitable clothing, a comfortable place to live, and so forth. But whilst they are acquiring the required ordinary favorable circumstances, their goal, their purpose, is not something ordinary, but something extraordinary, the goal of enlightenment.
City donda Karsungor and Diginelia and the Cedizamye, Diguya, Dunga Seya, Dondalia, Chica, and the Bugazer, which is Savine and Gasore, and Dabodina, Chidin Chimor, Chisadan, the Gazi Durbine, Lord Jal Hasmas and Du Mare, Chisan Dinesevena, Dichelia, and the Ludi Dorch and the Ludi, Chisi down and the Ludi that. Lüdi shaji lügis ngadu nanglolia samlo number sheba de su lüdi da ka jeje ne ba 지금 좋아해서 지상 좋고 거래서 지진 치마 내가 저 사이에 시도다 남지스는 뒤실에도 내가도 아니 다들 체디파 샤지는 치마질 좋아해 내가 다시 좋아해 인지미지 좋고 거래서 지진 치마 내가 저 사이에 사디.
Turning to the third line, it is certain that you will have to go to your next rebirth. So this life that we are living right now, whilst it doesn't have a definite end, a definite fixed lifespan, one can say in general, most people will not even make 100 years, and only very few will get beyond that. So we can say perhaps we will live for 100 years. But whatever that ending time is for us as an individual, it is approaching. Every day it is approaching. We can be certain that this life will end for each of us. And after this life, our consciousness will continue. Our continuum continues. But this life will end.
안지산 지딘 치마들에 내가 저고래 쓰다 간주기 시두고래 사실 송고로와 시드는 시두 지딘 치마 바지 내가 저고래 쓰다 지산다 저고바 인자 안당아 저기 체델이야 저기 되지 직 니바티 소마는 체델이야 튼예 가제 사바이네 지금 주 변조 가제 사바이네다 대 왕체로 권의 첨부 가제 여베네다 안 소수기 안콜 안지 요보다 코를 직게 첨부까지 여베네다 지산다 천년다 담 첨부 변조 첨부 코르망보까지 여베네 지수샤산 이 마지게 한주 시도도 님들 티줘야 말해서 지산 티줘야면 지산 샤한줘 그래서 지산 다시 샤한줘 보면서는 개와 침말을 패스가요 말했을 때기 지산 다들 가지 유변조다 유변조 가지 여베나 시도도 샤샤줘야래 개와 침말에 유변조되기 패미가면서 다체 될야 소수기 코르 가서 코르요 욕보다 코르요다 빼 소소 지기 코리아 같이 협에나 디차산 치주에며 봐서 소소 직부도 그래 지산 개와 침말에 디 코리아 디게 다들 세디기 코리아 사요 디게 침말에 핑거 말해서 세델이야 왕체 같이 있는 협에나 내 왕체 매와지 개와 침말에 디 왕체 디 비주다 하여 말해서 지산 세디기 된다려야 안 튕긴로 같이 줍제 소소기 변조 규거제 그 규침보 써야다 아니 지금 왕체 침보 써야다 아니 지금 덴디고 코르 망보로시 같이 협에나 시디 갑라 간 캐메바지 샤샤 조고래 인제 된자 개와 침말에 패요 말아 와서다 패요 말아 예서다 인보디
There are two things that are certain. This life will end, but our continuum continues into a new life, a new body. And when, for each of us, our moment of death comes, all that we've striven to accumulate in this life, whether it's material wealth, whether it's power and influence, whether it's dear friends and loved ones, all of this will be of no use to us at that precarious time. And all of that will have to be left behind. Those who spend so much time and energy accumulating material wealth and lovely possessions, or having possessions just that they are very attached to, that mean so much to them, at the time of death, they will be of no help. And not a single one of those possessions will accompany them into their next life. All will be useless at the time of death. None will help in lives to come. So too, for those who've striven to accumulate power and influence in this life, no matter how powerful they are, no matter what fearsome reputation they may have, the time of death, that cannot help. Nor can they take that with them to their next life. And in this life, if we've built really close and warm relationships with others, both with friends and family, the time of death, no matter how much their hearts break for our parting, they cannot prevent our death, nor can we take them with us to our next life. So in brief, all that we've striven to accumulate, the time of death, it gets left behind. Moreover, none of it can benefit us in lives to come.
제산데네 자다던다 가르송고르스네 다 쳇디잠이 군노지네 디기주의 동아세야게 돈달이 양아조 직 가제직 지기 배규 변조하다 옹아체다 데네 사비네 디기 단 지기 쳇딜이야 되어서 판도용마도 셰 쳇디 판체를 파다 치말 파야스가요 말아 와서 그러던데 이보 파야요 말에 매바 인자 아조라 가르고고에서네 지금 몽반에네 양아조리 디기용하다 동아세야지 동아매바다 디기용하지 고고로 와서 지단 디 용하게 된다를 규디 베지 지역으로마도 쳇디잠기 야자 삼다 되어 있나 디기다 아니 몽반에 디기용하다 동아세야지 대판 디기용하들이야 판도고 말해서 된다 디송고로 받아.
What one acquires in this life, again, whether it's relationships or it's power and influence or it's possessions, from this, in this life, some benefit does come, some happiness is attained. So it's not to say that it all serves no beneficial purpose at all. Some benefits, some happiness can be attained from it, but only in this life, only within the narrow confines of this one life. We have so many lives beyond this. This life is fleeting compared to this expanse of time before us. This we need to recognize. It helps put things in a clearer perspective, helps us to recognize where we put our energy in. Is it really bringing us benefit for lifetimes to come, or just for this one fleeting life?
가서는 시조디 다시는 매바 차교로서는 매반 차교 말해서 다게와 치마치 조고 그래서 매바 차교 게와 치마 조고 그래서 다게와 치마 조야도 수두고로서는 가서 수보된 주고 말다 시세도 수보데 사간라 되는 수보데 가르체베네 곧 가슴질이야 매바 쇠고 차르고 근데 가르 주고로서는 가는 저기 넘버십아 셈디 주고 넘버십아 주고 그러지 제가 당한 제가 개워 줍시디 아주 체딜이야 삼로디 기회 삼로 가지 삼로 따야다 지 기회 삼로 따 셴리야 님 펜비 삼로 따 수수의 기회 삼로 가지 따면은 지난 기회 삼로 따야기 뉴버디 가지 따는 뉴버디가 셈미데도 샤샤고 셈미데도 샤고 그래 지난 아직 셴리 뉴베 삼바다 체회 삼바다 지 나갸다 차도 삼로 같이 코이나 안디 뉴버디야 머니 셈미데도 샤고 그래 제사다 디바 제베네 디바제스도 되차 콘도 나제 셴라 녀번 체외 삼바 제베는 디바시고라데 디바 삼로 디바레 디 긴진의 류하게 관내 셴라 녀바 제반의 디바시고래 제가 당한저 개외 삼로스도 셴라 펜베 삼바다 제외 삼바다 진지게 야 컨트롤에 대바 제바 안지 타바 되니게 삼바 제와 두시네 진바도 주전 수비 냠는 데네 삼다에는 니 개화래 니 뉴바디 바샤디 아니 데 셈미디도 샤 디 제부디 다 마음반에 디기요야 차고로 제가 데네 인자 셈디 조아디 셈예데 뉴바 가르샤베는 디뇽도 주고로 받아 디뇽도 로이도 뉴바디 귤마서는 뉴바디 디다는 여바자 개와 침마 가와레베나 디기 셈미디 뉴비게다 제부디 마서나 다 주미용고로 받아 제가 개와 먹고 제바이나 디기 제부디 민진의 디기요야다 누가 가서 디바 망고 제바네 디 제보디 민진에는 동아야데 차고로 제가 당 아주 키려야 돼 가르켜줘야 여러서는 체델이야 아주 개와 같이 주비네 개와디 셈이는도 시디가로 디케로고 그래 디바에 같이나 디바디 케로고 그래 제가 되네 인자 아주 키려야 돼 개와 디바이 두고 그래 제가 되네 인자 아주 개회 자와 강토도 망아 두고 그래 사이도는 디슨 거래
For all of us, the time will come when this life comes to an end, when we exhale for the final time. And at that moment, it's not that we cease to exist. Our consciousness, our continuum, our mind, this continues on, and the body is left behind. Our continuum is all that continues on. Everything that surrounds the body and the body itself remains. Whilst everything that remains, everything that we've accumulated in this life and the relationships we formed, all of that remains with our body, our mind continues, and it continues with various imprints on the mind. So over this course of our life, our course of each day, variety of minds ripen within us, individual instances of consciousness. These leave an impression or have an impact on our continuum. Or to express it differently, they leave imprints on our mind. If our mind is wholesome or virtuous, wholesome or virtuous imprints are left on our mind. If our mind is unwholesome or non-virtuous imprints are left on our mind. These accompany us, and these ripen in our experiences in lives to come. So wholesome minds are those that we will be encouraged to develop within. Those minds which lead to an understanding, for minds such as, for example, understanding the reality of our situation, what leads to happiness, what leads to suffering. Minds such as contentment, which comes through a recognition that, for example, material things cannot bring lasting happiness. What I have is sufficient. Minds such as love, a genuine caring, wanting others to be happy. Minds such as compassion, a genuine wish for others to be freed of suffering. These are all examples of wholesome minds. Every time they arise within, they leave a wholesome or virtuous imprint on the continuum. So too, the wisdom realizing emptiness, bodhicitta, definite emergence, ethics, and so forth. A large collection of wholesome minds. As they ripen, as they arise in our mind, they leave imprints. And these will lead to wanted experiences or happy experiences in lives to come. The other class of minds, the unwholesome, the non-virtuous, these are our afflictions. These are forms of ignorance, of attachment, of anger, of jealousy, of pride, of competitiveness. These too, when they ripen, they leave imprints on our continuum. And those are what will accompany us as well to future lives. So therefore, when death comes, we leave behind all that we've striven to accumulate, whether it's possessions or relationships or power and influence. But what we take with us is the mental imprints that we accumulated whilst gathering all those possessions or relationships. All that we take with us are the imprints of wholesome and unwholesome minds.
Semlia Lobsang Dorje da semji give chot tangore said jisa semji zore said semlia tuore jisa dangan de samlo de le ne jingan de wongbi sheba de sheba ragwa chego samlo das dinang ando sam sim de le chawa ragba da chamba da rikmong bu yong gore jisa dangan de wongbi sheba de chasa ragba le yi nan de sheba de chawa de yi sheba na le ya sheba chara mongbu li gore jisa dinen zang 나도 다들 가르 비지던 거 망장 아주 셰바 라바 옹베 셰바 되게 비슷한 되거래. 배나 암조에 이제 즉 야고면도 지지제고 니라 여선 차상 암조기 셰베 왕셰지. 나위 셰베 퇴 안디 제수 이기 셰베 똑바게. 야지 미기 먹고 통해야 돼. 미기 통하네 디 왕셰 락바 통. 이제 이기 셰바 왕셰 되게 제수 장제. 야지 삼로 다마라 코리아. 지 두스네. 제사다 나저 미기 셰바 나위 셰바 네 셰바 제 셰바 류기 셰바 세디 왕셰가 여러와 그래서 왕셰가 지난 딩아보디기 망청한도 디베제다 디베제마도 배워서 니후디 그래 다지와 니후디 다디 왕베 셰바 차상 베제마도 그 니후와 샤사래 니세도 디 왕베 셰바 차라 비슷다 왕베 셰바 비슷다는데 디 제소다 왕베 셰바 유리를 통도 디 제소 이기 셰바르레게 디기 남도다 말하게 되네 어직 미기 셰비 미기 페이지 통하는데 소소게 되어서 남윤에 되어서 미팅 바르시네 미션다 니 계셔도 남자 미기 계셔도 미기 통고로 와다 통하는데 다 삼날 오지 디야데 지시에도 와 당내고 시기는 알아 균주 지가서 남자들 남도 기고 그래서 균주 제매하고 그거 말 이내 소소기 건 계셔도 통하지 소소게 남도래요 그래서 당 알아 균주 지기서 삼제 데니기 균주 지기서에 삼로 남도 기여도 Then Jelia midi to so numbu the Kahash. Then numbu Kaha and the Pasha Kungalia numbu Kansai midi down in Alia Gagan, Soja Namdoke, then Dijine meeting Bachada. Mangche Denish work, Chizan one share Rapa Sheba Rabati Bishu Danjin, Dini Tony, Namdo Damarake, Namdo Tony, and Azilia, and Chiki, Nyomo Badamarake, Nyomo Badamarake, Digi Genjin Azuya, and meeting Bachaya, and Divasaya Dige, and Denish Yungorova.
From that presentation, it will hopefully be clear why it's so important to train one's mind, because it's through the process of training one's mind that one trains one's mind to be ever more wholesome and ever less unwholesome. And in this way, we create ever more wholesome imprints and ever less unwholesome imprints. So when we talk about mind or consciousness or awareness, these terms are used interchangeably, and one must also bear in mind there is a great variety of levels of subtlety of consciousness. We mostly use very coarse levels, but beneath that are many layers of subtlety to consciousness. And a further common way to divide mind or consciousness is between those that come through our senses, that arise by means of our senses, and those which are solely mental. We mostly interact with our sense consciousnesses, with our minds which arise through our senses, and these tend to be very coarse consciousnesses as well as the resulting mental consciousnesses. So, for example, you're all hearing sound. So the sound that you hear is heard by an ear sense consciousness, and if you're seeing something, so what you're seeing appears to your sight consciousness. Following almost immediately are a variety of mental consciousnesses. So the mental consciousnesses will label what you're seeing, would put language and meaning to what you're hearing, and then behind that will be other various levels of mental consciousnesses, where one is engaging with what one is hearing, where one is having opinions of like or dislike on what's hearing and seeing, and so forth. So these are various levels of mental consciousnesses that follow the sense consciousnesses. This is our general level of engagement, and it's a very coarse level of consciousness. There are far subtler levels of consciousness which we tend not to engage with so much. But understanding how this process works is of great importance when one recognizes the need to train the mind. In order to train the mind, one needs to understand how the mind works. So from what we engage with our senses follows a variety of mental consciousnesses. So this is, in normal way of speaking, in normal English, it's the things we are thinking about. So it can be related to the past or the future, or thinking about what we are seeing or hearing. There's a variety of mental consciousnesses. These all too often do us much more harm than good, in that they are very often not in relation to reality. We make up stories about what we are engaging with. So, for example, if you see someone approaching, you don't know this person, you don't recognize them at all, and they also don't know you, so you're a stranger to each other. All that appears to your eye consciousness is the color and shape, and then your mental consciousness starts adding information, recognize it's a human being, and so forth. But then adds a whole series of judgments. Now, perhaps from how the person walks, or from how their physical body, whatever it may be, you add judgments. Those judgments come about in dependence on things that you have learnt over your life or heard over your life, views you may have, or this person may be introduced to you and they have a name of someone else that you despise. Whatever it may be, you have all these various thoughts going on about this stranger walking towards you. And if these thoughts are quite negative, your facial expression may well show this. This person approaches you and engages with you, but is a bit apprehensive because you are showing perhaps your aggression or your dislike towards a stranger. So this is just our normal way of living. This is how the mind works. And at each of these points, we are creating imprints on our consciousness. So with this illustration of the stranger, where one is now having quite negative thoughts towards this person based just on what you perceive and on what you've learnt about people who look like this, you have a whole host of negative imprints placed on your continuum. This is the process by which we gather imprints, both virtuous and non-virtuous.
Shinga Gabriela Jada, the nigger Gapsha, Gabriela, and the Semjendigate, Benekangurula Sopa, the negative Chitua Gangba Gash and the drama to a Gadia Yungdua. You know, they want to meet Cashet or the Ninja Gangatation, whole Robert Chadu, Kokarchigate, Quesam of the Tanga Suga, and Middle some Konamdo in the kitchen, and the Koran, but you can drag it, Konamdo, Korochig by the mouth of Hamo. Korong Lokshe, Loktashi, Korong Namdolata, Chigli, Dangal never yin Dirisha Sambeke, Namdo Kiche, Di Kin, Koroliba, Drag, Tabjita, Dini Yungudo, Tisan, Nanju, Samno, Tizan, Lokshe, Namdo, Mashingba, Mumba, Maribumba, or this Nisu is a Hamora, Di Kin, Ansulia, Delatine, and Ansulia, Chick. Lokta Sheba, Kasujawa, Lokachea, didn't tip aside Yungurua. The names are done to some little Zodi. She said that the names are done as Amjonia Delia. Yajimi Lamis in the church, and Sanjigi and church, Lasoba, and Migi Tony and Jiga, Lamachia, Sanji, Chia, Lasoba, Denigi, Deploy Lasoba, Pejita, Dichebina, Yaji Samlodia, and Delia, Rameba, and Devaki, and church, and Yamlin, Pembi, Samlo, Dunir Dumbaki, there are Dikins in the Yungurwa. The names are the Anjikavasai. She's an Anjugi, the Mita, Amchota, Bejitan Sadi, the Manoa Chilia, Yabuchilia, some Tony, Bejitan to Vena, Anjikavasaya, you do. The Anjik Disoya, some Tana Tony, Jesa, Lobachili, Bejitan, Dikins in Anzulia, Ganga chair each other. Jesa Tamja Sambatala, Rally, so similar rally girl, Kuno, some Notigi, Kasi Chol, Cubine. Some of the rally gore. She said, Dineza, Gawa said, much Jebane, Bacha, Gawa, some of the Shagor. Chisa, that Digi, Chisan, good and Kinlet, Digi, Digi, good and Kinlet in the Yunguza, Setelia, and some of Kiwi, some of the some of Kiwi, Java, some of the Manga, Tap to Wine, these sub in the Bachal was on Nuba these some of the young of the Shido in a Gawa Chima, some of the nobody the same day, the nobody, you Just never use Sabon the Yobanzada, the Mambana, Yachimatelia, Kinchi Chedu, Sabani Minchine, and the Chigans of Diki Trufung, this one or other. So to give another illustration of how we have many different types of ignorance, but there's one, the ignorance of confusion, of not understanding a situation even on a course level, how this leads to us making wrong decisions being made. So for example, if you're driving and you see an animal that's been caught in a snare, you can see it writhing in pain, desperate to break free. So you stop, you go to try and help it. Almost certainly that animal will be terrified because it has no idea what's happening. It perceives itself not only as being in immense pain, but in grave danger, that you could be the predator coming to eat it alive. So it's desperate to escape the trap and escape who it perceives as a predator. But you're just there to help the animal. So of course, you release the animal and it flees away. But because of the animal's ignorance, not knowing what's going on, when it saw you, greater fear arose
within itself. And if it's a vicious animal, it may have even tried to claw you or bite you. So from this, you can see this animal, despite its immense pain, was also creating non-virtue. Whereas if the animal understood the situation better, it would recognize, here comes a friend, here comes a savior. And whilst the pain would remain intense, the mind would calm because it knows help is at hand. So this is an illustration about animals, but it shows the working of our mind, how in particular through ignorance, we misapprehend how things are and think we thereby are much more likely to create non-virtue. So this process of accumulating imprints happens both on the side of virtue and non-virtue. So likewise, when one hears teachings, and if it leads to the arisal of minds of virtue within, minds such as trust, trust in the teachings, minds such as aspiration to cultivate virtuous minds such as generating love towards all. In this way, through our hearing sense consciousness and our resulting mental consciousnesses, we create virtuous imprints. Likewise, through sight, when we see holy objects and faith arises, or we read text and again an interest in the Dharma arises and a yearning to become the kind of person described arises, in this way we create virtuous imprints. So the process is the same for virtue and non-virtue. And all of these thoughts, these individual consciousnesses, they have an impact on our continuum, on our overall consciousness, these virtuous imprints and non-virtuous imprints. And these are what accompany us for lifetimes to come. This is what we take with us when we leave this life. We leave behind our friends, our possessions, our successes and failures, they're all left behind. But the imprints we created whilst engaging with them, whilst accomplishing them, those are what we take with us. And those imprints accompany us for lifetimes to come, and they ripen in our various experiences, pleasant and unpleasant experiences. And they have an impact then on how we continue to engage in the worlds, in the lives ahead of us.
시그레에서 시두그레 사지 윤텐직치 시두그레 시바이나 하나 세디잠기 튕게다 지기 담년자다 왕차다 안지 코라단 가제 여번에 디즈티에 판도 팽이 말에서기 치마에 판도주도 말에서지 윤전이제 되네 도시네 삼다 되네 안에 겨 치마 팽이 가르쳐줘야 줘야 가요라서는 세딜이야 디비자와 같이 주는 디버디 키르고 와레스 게외자와 같이 주는 게와디 키르야 요레스 디자디니 인자다 키르야 요바디 게와 같이 주는 게와디 키르야 요레 게와디 키르바 있나 다가서는 게와디 주변에 셈기데도 뉴바샤 셈코랑 게와 치마도데 되네 게와디 주고 와스 되네 인자도 진짜 하고 와체 되네 삼다제 다 되네게도 하고 와체 다 하고 네 되네 게와디 키르도 되네 뉴바 바차 요바자 디기 견지 태야도 되네 뉴바디 민전 지보디 안디기디 주투고래 용고래서 내내게 도시나 가서 삼나다 도시나 하고 와서 오래서 되네 하고 전에 되네 같이 오래라는 대치를 쓰는 되네 인자서 대치를 쓰는 제가 체디게 튕긴 가제다 변조다 어떤 연다다 코로나 같은 디펜 팬데믹에 개치만 미펜바 직제 안에 가서래 내내 아는 아주기 인지 미징 해봐도 시에 인반에 다 쳐봐 지죠 김전이 이제 대치르서 자선다 기회자와 같이 주보이나 니기다 개워치말에 판도 여보 김전 직제 대치르 김전 되네 숨제 대인장 안다 가르쳐 오래서나 다등을 세텔이야 치매 돈도 야와 릭세되네 김전 되네 장한테 개워치마 예래야 디기 주야게 디기 요야게 될야 돈도 예르제네 안에 자업해줘 제거받 제고래에서 치마도도 예와 릭세 개와 치마야 삼다 치미기다 또 나라 디기주야 디기 요야기 될 미제네 아니 돈도 예르제네 디라야기 규디다든 사고래에서 와다 디치리 치마 돈도 야와 릭스.
What we see then in this third line is that for each of us, our death is certain. The time will come when we exhale for the last time in this life, in this body. And at that time, and secondly, at that time, our possessions, the power and influence we've accrued, our friends and loved ones, will not be of any benefit for us. They will all rather be left behind. And as we leave this body, move to our next rebirth, what accompanies our continuum, what's imprinted on our continuum, are virtuous and non-virtuous imprints. This is all that will accompany us. Now moving to the fourth line. Therefore, it makes sense to strive to benefit your future lives. The conclusion to come to from the reflection from the third line is that one must utilize what remains of this life to accumulate virtue and abandon non-virtue. What that means is we need to strive to have our mind dominated by wholesome, virtuous ways of thinking and to lessen the arisal of non-virtuous or unwholesome ways of thinking. And in particular here, our motivation, we need to cultivate and have that arise in a way that's sincere and genuine, because a wholesome motivation is what impacts whether virtuous or non-virtuous thoughts arise. Moreover, a wholesome motivation, this is what determines how we engage, how we interact in our life. So then the fourth line, therefore, it makes sense to strive to benefit your future lives, and benefit your future lives in the way mentioned here, ensuring the dominance of virtuous ways of thinking.
치마 돈도니에서 치마들에 양도 개와 치마 섬담에 개와 치마들에 마소 숨 야와이다 돈도 자다 디에네 된도 안에 하다 미고 방세지 요바제 치마 디나네다 파 치마 조서들라 계서들라 다 된데든데 요래서 지사 디니기든데 야와이다 돈도 개바나 강아래 지사 델레 되데 하다 미고 방 토바나 다디 안에 델레디기 주야다 강아세야다 디기 주야 야가 요바인자 디 개와치마 온도이기 돈도 개와치마 세야돼 돈도 온이 고바 돈도 예 다뭐 온도 고바 디텔레나 저기 기회 냠는 제제 디텔레야 아니 지금 거기서 탈바다 탐지 캠프 고바 톱토바 지긴 셈비 삼로 데니스다제 다 개와치마에네 하다 미고바 톱 덴텔라 아니 소수기 디기 잠마인 바제 덴델레이네 아니 제게 탈 심자 탐지에 펜버두야다 심자 탐지 산요고바 토비 치도 기회 자완냠네 지기 셈베 삼다제 디돈도냐 돈도냐 듬바로서 막서나 군노 듬바로시 데니스당 다 데니기 돈다라 다 계셔 주고 그래서
When our time of death comes, we embark to our next life. At that point, for beings, there are just two directions one can go in. For ourselves as humans, one can either remain in the higher realms as a human or as a god, or fall into the lower realms as an animal, a spirit, or a hell being. Those are the sole directions one can go in. And to ensure that one continues to have good rebirths in lives to come, to remain in the higher realms, one needs to accumulate those causes. And the causes are, in brief, one needs to cultivate virtue, virtuous ways of thinking, have virtuous imprints on the mind. The strength of those determines whether one attains a good rebirth or not. So therefore, when one cultivates a motivation, recognizing the importance of a motivation in that it's due to the quality of our motivation that virtuous or non-virtuous minds will arise and determines how we then engage. If one has a motivation to ensure that one does develop bodhicitta, that one is a person who brings great benefit, real meaning into the lives of others, to the extent that that motivation is genuine, it will have an impact on the quality of the virtuous minds that arise, their strength, their dominance, and so forth. and therefore have an impact on how we engage in the world. And in this way, we create virtuous imprints, which will ensure future good rebirths, as well as the quality of imprint, so that in future lives, we will want to help others. We'll seek ways that we can be of great meaning, bring benefit into the lives of others. So this will come about in dependence on the quality of motivation that we cultivate now in this life, and the resulting virtuous minds that follow from that.
그래서 나도 신에 돈돈예제네 치매게 되기 요하게 규디 두고 그래서 당은 저기다 안 유튜브나 유튜브에 대 두당 간에 두고 그래 가라가라 삼로 가라가라 땅 고래 세디 지마 지심주의 유튜브에 가래서 나는 믿는 슈바나 해 제가 나보 그런 저기다 지게 유튜브에 대 릉아 이수면 예제된 비 수름송와에 대 차고 그래 제가디 릉아 이수면 예제된 비 수름송와에나 수림송에도 땅을 대지 셰바나싱아 저기 가르소래 이 강아체 유망보치 미다 나다 되니기 연구를 했을지도 제가 나요고네 수림송에서 칸에 파샹리에 네베사와 네바다 아니 가소래 젠리에 통조다야 기시 두제현 마기와야기 기시데 송고고 다간실에 준시아당 아니 참아제야당 측수시야당 아니지 준 참아 측수 가게 되기바 지금 마치베지 송야 직제但是旅游国呢送下点的就旅游国呢先来明年把它先以那个加了说古马木国了说把它的那个这个老爷没些没些把了说送下旅的嘛但以的说呀旅游个就把原来的做生意团的用过了生来工作来的学呢即先来638呢等于旅游个600的利用过的实际上做din那个做生意就在生意一团呢先来638 738的几面是被当旅游过呢送过了就在今天在旅游艺术面先来600个什给我米给我的怕嘎下班几面是被怕嘎吧呢的那个第什么旅嘛了嘛了的但第不忙不就过卡了过了第不个忙不就过卡了过了而且就在的出什么送过了而且但这种今天送我的安当然是旅游个자와 지기로 와 자가 지도는 가용 것은 야가 지용으로 그래서 현래 팬백에 삼로 나 레제 삼레 다제 니토안에다 나요 권에나 현래 즉 팬백 삼다제 아니 제 마싱바다 마싱바를 롭된지야 라비아다 진짜 저거서 팬백스 비 롭된지 현래야 아니 지게 강하세야다 디기주야旅游권에나 현도와 즉마这个别身嘛是心间去了啥吧的那送给节啦说吧的你那个刚刚车子米里呢刚刚车吧的那个绕节苏布团的绕节的那个那都是偏不主要那旅的啊那有个呢三轮呢现在偏别三把讲解呢接着的那个讲的现在啊你刚刚写个东啊刚刚写的说了你马上把来是录进去好过啊解决那这个两这个사야 동야다 둘로다 되니게 강아 체간절이야 소소야 강아 두두토네 컨절이야 지 팬도 로바체 되니 제베네 진짜 류기에 개와 나게 개와 이에 개와 제 류가 있으면 개와 디데사고래체 진짜 디 두시나 가서 라바라고 쉬베나 진짜 되니게 개주 두고 그래서 돼 남보디 송거로 와다 개주 두탕로 지로다
And in the fourth line, this word to strive. So this word comes up quite often, and it indicates the strength of mind, striving or being earnest. So it's a mind that is sincere and is committed, and it's not a mind that is weak and wishy-washy, but it is a mind that is strong and determined. So with such a mind, then, there is indispensable cause to ensure that one continues to have good rebirths is that of ethical restraint. Ethical restraint where one restrains the three doors, restrains one's physical behavior, one's speech, and one's mind. So one restrains one's physical behavior from being unethical, restrains one's speech from being unethical, and restrains one's mind from being unethical. This is the meaning then of ethical restraint. And the reason for focusing on, or the division into body, speech, and mind is because it's through these three doors that we accumulate non-virtue or accumulate virtue. So in terms of our physical behavior, there are three general guidelines given, and these are to restrain from physically harming others, in particular taking their life, killing, or secondly, from stealing, and thirdly, from sexual misconduct. So one restrains oneself physically from engaging in such non-virtuous or unethical behavior. And in terms of speech, one restrains oneself from engaging in harsh speech, from lying, from engaging in divisive speech, or senseless speech, pointless speech, time-wasting speech. So in this way, one restrains one's speech from being unethical. And our physical and verbal behavior always follows a mental impulse. So therefore, most difficult but most important is to restrain the mind. One restrains one's mind from attachment or covetousness, or from anger or harmful intent, as well as wrong views. So one restrains one's mind to ensure it is ethical. Thereby one's resulting, or the speech and physical behavior that will follow, will be ethical. So in this way, one closes the three doors of body, speech, and mind to unethical behavior. And this is ethical restraint, the indispensable training by which one creates the causes that lead to excellent rebirths. And the process of ethical restraint is not only the list of things not to do, but it involves what one should do, which is simply the opposite. So in terms of one's physical behavior, where ethical restraint means you restrain yourself from taking life, or from stealing, or from sexual misconduct. Rather, one engages in physical acts to help others, perhaps practicing generosity, helping those who are in need in various ways. So this is an ethical practice of helping others. So too with speech, where one restrains oneself from lying or deceiving or engaging in senseless speech or divisive speech. Rather, one then engages in speaking in a way that is honest and straightforward and gentle and loving, as well as giving guidance and advice where required, and so forth. And then this all comes from the mind. So the mind that is ethically restrained will be restrained from covetousness and harmful intent, and rather one will have a wholesome motivation, ideally a motivation of bodhicitta, and at the least a genuine wish to be of benefit to others. So this then is a very coarse or rough presentation on how to accumulate the virtue of ethical restraint, where one restrains oneself from following non-virtue, but rather engages in virtue.
Dine zadang nyamlen je di kiwa chima chime dona du samdang du stang gore si deji shuba na yu kunlong di ngana ju da semja thamje rang chi bu mai ba semja thamje da dunga se dan di yu ju ye dugi semja thamje ge ne dunga se di yu ju ye dona le semja tham sa yu ko ba thobar chi yin se be samlo kunlong din sta dine samle di tang to je le ya an di jang e san yu ko ba thubi chirdu semja thamje ge di yu ju ye dona le ya ningi Geshe nyamlen chi yin di zang lunga yusum yo ne shan le nebe jawa da shan le chewe se jawa samlo di gyne ji chu me de ne jawa zaw yin chi me a san be ge du chi ne samla da yi da de wa de sam da ne an de ne ya so so rang de je je le ya an ji ge so so rang ge da lunga yusum yo ne shan le pen bi jawa gang tu tu ju yi sa de shan ya dugi sempe da sosugi da benjuge tone yobene sosugi chedele gaji yobene shanliya en penbi jawa juya la tangya ya gonjole chope shanliya gang dang tu de dangin sempe da dusine samlo dusine jangu hore da ya ji ngana ji ngo su laglen da tupta ma tupte ya ji ngana ji ben ngana ji shanle roba ji si se da sosugi 소식의 수부교다 강아체베네 로버체 투야데 리유건 로버체 투야 갈레하고 차그와 데네자 다투야 아직 튕기에 더데나 소소게 아직 지금 당에 다다면 소소 강요베데 샬라 제샤베나 아직 디아 다다 차고만 소소게 아직 튕기면에 아 소소리아 아직에 냠nen제야래 고갑 아니 리쳐야데 용고마로 데네자 다디 삼로 꿀노 딜라 삼로 데네 지세베게 삼로 나래 두스 냠네 조 삼로 나땅 데니게 토네 삼땅에 토네 소소게 데 뉴발레 바베게 소소게 당에다 소소게 제투에 줘베나 아직 양 샬리아 로체야다 초푸야라 소바데 제야레 안 루주코네 샬로 로체바다 데네 제베나 온도시 아직 아주 최시에 왔으나 라왔으나 진행에 메네 셰스카요 말로데나 지자데 소소게 당봉에 지랍지 겹지 판버 두빈 선배 삼로 나래 디장 아직 데니게 셰스 고갑 야보를 판도를 준비 야보 여바이나 소수기 바지시 아니 판도 주야래 그시데네 고갑 말아바이네 아니 바야마 삼로 나래디네 장바이나 님이 고갑지라기로 와데 제가 디네에서 삼로 나에 자야디 제가 추팀 냠내서야데 삼로 자야데 진비 냠내서 또 삼로 나래야 되는시 로치긴 판도 주긴이 루유고네 샹라 제지 로치기 아니 변조 토능에 샹라 두스 로치긴 선배 두시네 제 진바들 양아 지금 상승의 진바 아니 최기 진바 아니 미치비 진바서 여러와다 제가 디네자다 상승의 진바서 소소 변조 통계되는 게 잘리야 직접 최고 부야래 샬레 강아세야 제지 로치긴 선배 삼는 다야지 삼는 다야지 되네 저게 상승의 진바 단 최기 진바스도 소수의 강신배 최디게 냠는디게 마 샬레 랍 샬레의 기회 삼로 예주고 있는 선배가 삼다야다 되네게 삼다야지 내 미지비 집바스도 심진 소르바 냠타유부터 소르바 겹제 아니 지 소르 겹 되네게 고 겹이 선배가 되네 삼다 두 소데 되네게 삼다다 삼로 나라 두 장고다지 되네 삼다 차상 개와디야 수수지부 마에 심진에 폐되게 심진 탐지기 된다게 상여고 봐 토베주 군에 라제 아니 군론 디토네 삼로 되네 따이도 따디 개와드 빼 마세 야체 뭐 쉬우사고 그래지 제가 되네 개we 삼로데 제가 두 삼다데 개we 삼로 따이도 야체 뭐 디게 다 대보디 마오바나 가서 가와께 왜나다 이 대보디 아니 미에 튕기 깨지 상어도 아니 깨지 쳐야도 미에 임바로 제가 디기 주야데 된시고 그래 제가 제가 다 치매 돈도 녀와 릭세 치매 돈달 돈도 녀시 냠는 제고래서도 냠는 제야데 삼로 두수 땅 냠는 제고 삼 땅고래 사지 지소 만 삼로나 검시소에 디리에서 올라
Motivation I encourage you to cultivate in your meditations here and as well as is at home is firstly to recognize the equality between myself and all other beings. We all want to be happy. No one wants to experience problems or difficulties. And this, come to recognize within yourself how this wish for happiness is your driving motivation behind everything that one does, and so too for others. Even when people act in a way that's unskillful, they are doing so because they want to be happy and free of problems. Take this understanding, develop it further, develop love and compassion towards all, develop it into bodhicitta, into the determination to become a Buddha for the sake of others. So just mentioning these steps now very briefly, then when one has generated the determination to become a Buddha so that one can be of greatest impact to others. To attain Buddhahood, one has to accumulate virtue. In other words, one has to strengthen significantly one's wholesome ways of thinking. So then one moves in the meditation to make the determination. Today, I will not harm others. I will only benefit them. I will not harm others through my physical behavior. I will only benefit them through my physical behavior. My speech too. I will ensure my speech brings no harm, but it brings only benefit. And I'll try and tame my mind, restrain my mind, so even my way of thinking isn't harmful, but is only beneficial. And I will utilize my capacity, however limited it is right now, I'll utilize my capacity to be of help to suffering beings. So in this way, one develops or generates a motivation to create the causes, to become a Buddha, in order to guide others to achieve the same state you want to achieve, a state of lasting happiness, a state freed from suffering. So this motivation you generate then, and you try, because when you get used to it, it takes just a few minutes. So remind yourself of it throughout the day, so that it impacts on your daily activities. Because to be able to accumulate virtue, you have to have a healthy body. You have to have a certain degree of comfort and comfortable circumstances to live in. All these need to be attained. To engage in society, one needs to be dressed in the appropriate way, so one needs to make oneself presentable. So all of these things need to still be done, but do them with a motivation that through maintaining my health, through presenting myself in an appropriate manner, may I create warm and close connections with others. And through these, may I come for lifetimes to interact with these beings, but benefiting them ever more. So in this way, one generates this wholesome motivation and has that underlying even one's very ordinary and mundane activities. In this way, your Dharma practice is not just limited to occasions such as this or to a cushion, but you carry it forward throughout your day. And moreover, in this cultivation of your motivation, develop a long-term view through recognizing that this life will end and others will follow. The skills and qualities I develop in my mind now will accompany me for lifetimes to come. So whatever I develop in me now, I may be able to express to others in this life, and if not, certainly in lives to come. So for example, when you've come to experience the benefit of the Dharma, and you want to share that with others, you may not have the opportunity now, but continue to develop it in yourself, study and meditate. Because in this life, you may well have the opportunity to give some advice, maybe even teach. But by cultivating qualities deeply within, in lives to come, you'll be able to give ever more. And then if we think of various practices, this one I've just mentioned, of giving of the Dharma, this is one of the greatest gifts to give to others. Within the practice of generosity, it's the giving of Dharma. So in this life, one may have that opportunity, but one will certainly have the opportunity to give advice or guidance or counsel to friends and acquaintances and work colleagues. So by developing qualities within, ever more skillfully, you'll be able to help others deal with their suffering. Another key way of practicing generosity is that of giving of fearlessness. So this is on those occasions where one does meet someone who is experiencing tremendous fear. The examples usually are when one meets an animal, such as the one trapped in a snare, or an insect in a puddle, or perhaps a friend whose mind is deeply troubled. Comfort them, ease them, help beings lessen their suffering. So the examples usually given are that of saving life that would otherwise be lost, because life is what we all cherish the most. Then the third way to give is that of material generosity, and this people have a lot of familiarity with. But when giving materially, practicing material generosity, or giving that of fearlessness, helping those who are in tremendous danger, tremendous fear, or when giving the Dharma, teaching, with all of these, what is indispensable, what is of most importance, even more so than the activity, is that quality of the motivation. Hence the great importance of every day developing your motivation and trying to keep it alive throughout the day, so that when one does practice generosity, material or fearlessness or giving advice or teachings, naturally, spontaneously, this wish to help others in a way which is probably quite minor and insignificant, but knowing that through this connection, through this karmic imprint, I'll be able to help this and other beings ever more, and eventually help them attain enlightenment. With such a motivation, practice generosity practice ethical restraint, and so forth. In this way, one will very quickly accumulate extensive wholesome virtuous causes that will ensure good rebirths in lives to come and having excellent material conditions and relationships with others and so forth, the conditions that are required to be of ever more help and benefit to others. So what's been mentioned here is when you see the word training or practice, you should understand it refers to this, training the mind or putting the Dharma into practice in one's mind, so that when one expresses one's motivation through, say, material generosity or giving or fearlessness or talking, when one expresses oneself physically or verbally, that it is the Dharma that is coming out of you, because it's the Dharma that has arisen in your mind.
Lamsa kitang de pui da ho yong ka ho da chi xian lan de ji me san be lu nga ni ji de su su nge sam ta ne yang ka bre ya yan ya ji su su ji pa shuo de ya da an ji gi kon ro de ya de je de yong go ro da nga zo ka san kom shi che bo ro de ne za nga zo le dang bo lamsa ya bo dang bo nyam le ji de pui da ho yong ka ho ro ji de ne ji de dang nga zo ge Bendigo ya no true sure de nga samna na ka ga ya da di ji ge surim sung sen da ji ge da da che tu min de da di ji je me ji che min do san be ge de ya sem shu cha ro ya de yung go de ji na Bendigo ka nga mongoli go da nga ji ji de a de ji jo da ye ji ji na ya di ri ya nga ji xian le ci su ro xie shuo song sa da an di ri ya ni ge ji dong en dem ju du jie de shuo song de ji ge de nyam ne ji de ge de ya bu ji yung min do de Sambe samjine to semshu chaya da dene yungo ro chisa dene za de semshu chaya ska ya ma de karsna nga jo le dangbo inza delia dene ki ka yungo re chisa dene so so rang ga shen le pemba ra kam sa da we na ya pa jo ne pa ga za ya bo che na su gang zu nyo ba ji ri ji chu su ji yun je je de gan dene yungo ro che dene ka lo da nge pemba de le de pemba ji ma ji ga min di ga san ya gyo cho ya ga min su be na semshu chaya yungo ro de ji semshu chaya yo ma le so 지는 노트 용고를 제가 내내자 심시 마차바지 내내자 다디가리 양아주기 세배냠네 세대 계침벌에서 세배냠네 지사 세배냠네 세대 다시 소소랑랑 계산리에 팬백까지 두빈 판연도를 제나 양식 내내토는 샹리아 샹기 소스를 균제자다 지금도서 시를 제가 될이야 지금 심시 차야 잡려는 세배냠네 제바이나 스테이션 check 말해서 다 소수게 다 강아체 다 대딩아 강아체 다 이제 야고 제투문 선배가 셈차를 어디 되냐 소수게 데 그래서 동아 당하는 요새 봤어요. 소수게 강아체다 당도 내자 어디 되는데 연구를 되는 중에 무투신 냠는 지기인데 냠는 집에 갑다 되냐 강아체 다 말아 책이래 이내 당에 무투신 내가 차지 견쇼상 차지 너를 중송했으면 이제 샤마샤바 정에 무딘 지기인데 강아 연구를 해서 배삼다제 되네 두신에 당번에 동아진데 연구를 해서 배삼다샤베나 안또 제 대술야 배지 삼노 두자 삼마다제 된 연구를 해서 쇠바콤 델야 셈마초와 셈 마슌바제 냠내 해야 돼 지상 쇠배 냠내 동아 다는 있어봐 아니 지게 아니 네발의 지면이 배워서 소소히 파 가제 야고체나 직处理啊 직 견주자 나 지금 민도서 욕다시야다 되는 될이야 직 네발의 지면이 배워봐 안데 콘 두스 네바제 파 안데 콘을 말아봐지 안데라 아니 이제 그 직선비게 다고 코롱라 코롱서 심 마기바 남도 옹행할 디지고래 선배 삼다지 콜이야 니지곰제 코롱 마기바 줘봐네 되네게 안에 가서 네발의 지면이 배워봐 지사 다양직 다양한 저기 철랑에 심이 쇠바신 최 냠는 제발에 아직 강아 류리야 강아체 심내 강아체다 되는 용도 갑라다 되니기 때 냠는 제대 고배 약보래 되니 제대 배 약보래스메다 강아 가지고 나게 강아를 맞은 바지 냠는 지긴 셈비게 삼로데 야 뽑아야 돼 삼당 거래지 지자 쇠배 냠는 제고래서 지 쇠바셔야 되기 냠는 제야 되기 소수기 시행기 소수를 녀버 제외네 소수게 셈 맞추고 송급제야 소수기 대지 강한 체비네 델야 안에 강한들 shum범하게 송급제야 안에 소수기 취념는 제바에나 강한테 델야 쇠보금이 쇠바 당len세 쇠바시데 데 돈이 숙체 못게야 뽑아게야 누스는 용고래 제자들 쇠보금이야 되게 머리에서데 나즈레 두순고래 제자 되니게 쇠보금 갑래 한지 갑래 쇠보금 모두 따다 이 그디나 쇠보금 뒤에 깔래가 보러와 제자다 되니 아당에 그 쇠보금도 냠내 야고 중민도선 배야 샤메래 어디지 이나 야네 야노 어디지는 너트신나 주마다 다 되니 야야 등에 무드니 냠내 지기 공부 있어 쇠보금이 세배 삼당고 오래지를 당도
Spoken now briefly about first ethical restraint, and now in the immediate preceding segment, a bit about generosity. A third practice that is indispensable but difficult is one where one has to be accepting of yourself, accepting where you are in terms of the quality of your mind. Because the truth is, as beginners, we have very little control over our mind. As you meditate more and come to be more aware of your inner processes, you'll see how you have no control. The mind just does its own thing. And therefore, if you feel inspiration from the Dharma and the wish arises within you to be the very best person you can be, this is excellent. But the truth is, it will not come about easily. You'll struggle to fulfill this capacity because of our habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking. Whether you're new, or whether you've been here for some years, or some decades, it's likely you're still going to get angry sometimes. Still going to get annoyed, frustrated, criticize others. Over time, if one continues, this will become less. But at first, it will still be very often. So the key point to make here is you need to accept yourself where you are. We're not here to fight with ourselves, to criticize ourselves. This is unskillful. It's not in any way helpful. Rather, when you've acted in a way you'd rather not, and by acted it can either be physical, verbal, or just your way of thinking, your mental response, if it's not been in accordance with the person you want to be, recognize that. And actually rejoice that you have seen so, and rejoice that not only have you seen it, but you don't accept that. You don't justify your anger, for example, or justify your pride. So that you have seen it, and you don't see it as acceptable, this is good. Take strength from that. Take that as a sign of progress. Because in our society, much afflicted behavior is encouraged in society, seen as praiseworthy. So when you recognize that a response of, for example, annoyance or anger is not correct, then rejoice in that. And recognize what I'm seeing is my deep habituation. That today I saw this many times that I got angry. That's just because I'm habituated. That's all it is. It's a habit pattern. It doesn't say that I am an angry person. It just says I'm habituated to anger. That's all. Now I see that this will take time. And that's okay. So what I'm describing here is the practice of patience. Patience is three expressions or three divisions. This one is about being patient with your own inner turmoil. And the meaning of the word patience is for your mind. A patient mind is a mind that stays undisturbed in the face of adversity. So this first type of patience is undisturbed in relation to the adversity from within, one's own way of thinking. And this is one of the three types of patience. It's perhaps the one of greatest importance. Because if one, for example, gets angry or attachment overwhelms oneself, or whatever it may be, the mistake is not that the affliction arose. That's okay. The mistake is giving up. The mistake is thinking, this is too difficult for me. The mistake is believing, I've been trying for so long and I can't. It's too hard. That's the mistake. Once again, expressing what one is deeply habituated to, it's to be expected. So patience in relation to oneself, in other words, with one's own mind, not getting overwhelmed by what's arising within. This is a crucial training. Accepting where you are and not giving up, just continuing. The key way to make this and other practices effective is to be very light in your attitude, not grasping, not tight, but very light. So when inner turmoil arises, just let it go. No need to make a big deal, and just go on with it. This is being patient with oneself. And generate a strength of mind through recognizing some progress, that you've seen, that you notice you got angry, that you know anger is not acceptable, that you know the antidotes to anger, to develop more love and so forth. And then continue. And it's imperative to generate the strength of mind and not to give up. Remind yourself, my teachers believe in me. They recognize the incredible capacity that I have. I still maybe take this largely on faith, but they believe in me. So I know I can do this. All that's required is let go of the inner turmoil and just continue in the way that I'm being trained. So this then is one of the three types of patience, being patient with one's own inner turmoil. Another type is the one that we're most used to in the terms of the usage of this word of patience, which is being patient with outer turmoil. So this we usually think of other people in the way they interact with us, or situations we may find ourselves in. If one has come to understand one's own inner process well, it's very easy to be patient with others. If one is patient with oneself, it's much easier to be patient with others. Because if one can accept oneself, warts and all, one can accept others for where they are, and not in the same way as we try to let go of self-judgment. To the extent we're successful there, we can be successful letting go of judgment of others. These two work together. As one grows, being patient with others, it's easier to be patient with oneself. As one is patient with oneself, it's easier to be patient with others. And again, the meaning of this word patience is the mind staying undisturbed in the face of adversity, whether the adversity comes from within or from others. And the third type of patience is being patient in relation to one's practice, in relation to engaging in the Dharma. That sometimes one just won't feel like it, sometimes one will be rather wanting to do something else, or one has done, for meditation to be effective, the same meditation needs to be done again and again and again. And with this, one needs to be patient, because all too often it's a bit boring. It's not so exciting, it's not something new and exciting, it's just the same thing again and again. But we need to continue with this. And when you recognize perhaps a sense of boredom, or do I want to do that same meditation again? Recognize that. Let it go. And then engage in the meditation. Strengthen one's habituation to wholesome ways of thinking. So this then is the third practice, that of patience. And it too is a practice of great importance.
Samlo nalo dus changkori se jisna dangan jugi chue nyamne je se di samlo nalo dushine jike pa madik badi dinere se jig badi dinere se samlo nalo samlo tanha di pa yenje che ji yakbu di samlo pendo에 samlo dire pan dun가요 samlo dire se di yenje che jisna da dangan ju 가르쳐 고르시네 판도에 디유 용하게 samlo di 야네 야도 삼다도 뉴버셔 당과 책을 지산디 곰세디 가서 제곰나 조곰세 니용저 제곰세 지저 윤제 삼다 되네게 제바제 어디디 판도에 디레도와 니제네 디용구도와 니제네 디용구도와 세베 두시네 삼다도 제바제 두시데 되네 야고지 심리야 어떻게 어디디 딱바 레샤디 디레도와 삼베게 녀바로 니용도 안 심리야 녀바 녀선에 그디나 제메 바샤리가 책으로 봐. 진짜 니네 두시네 녀바 녀지 공부를 해서 대 삼당을 제바지 제금 차고래 두시는 것도 공부를 해서 야네 야도 삼다도 줌제 삼다 제바제 되네 약부인바데 하고 야네 야도 삼다데 두시 제바는 만족이다 곰 세대 냠네 세대 디레 진짜 냠수 렌수 냠수 소수게 셈디 냠수 누바야 차다 되니게 상비직 삼로디 냠시드 빼 지기야 누바래야 차다제 안지 두스타야들 고 냠수 렌스 오래 진짜 니 누바차 진짜 누바 차다는 거다 삼로 누바야 차까지 더비는 개외 바차 투가 차고래 디 진전에 삼로가 저 누바 체디게 야가지고 뭘 빼나서 두스는 락바락바 삼다는데 난 삼나리야 지미질이야 지 삼로 야고지 펜베 삼로 지 제와로 삼로 되네 인기지디 그 규르지네 닝치보시에다 동거 넘겨지나 다양한 뜻지 파셔 미딜이야 뜻 셈레 대랑랑 계지로 용도 하데 미동 다양한 파셔 미디 뜻 코라서나 셈라 마지버려 주네 그 동 넘기는 안지 통하네 괜찮다 진짜 소소이나 아주 마지버려 지 다티 코직 제사슴 마지버려 용도 제상 안지 동거 넘겨디 규해디 나가 삼로 돈에 삼로 코아지 코아가 레드 동안 넘 유도와 제가 미션다 동안 넘 유로도 미션다래 넘규디 돈에 현래 디기 초와 갑을 초와 디기 제투야다 갑을 초와 동안 제투야 용도와 제가 딩아지 디세부하고 두다지 소소리야 이 미션다지 셈 코라사데는 그 동이 넘규디 지 현자되도 마음에 셈 맞기와 차용도와 제가 나는 다가로 나는 셈이야 현리야 콩로다지 내 삼에 따에도 게요도 아니 지게 맞기와 차용도 디유도 넘규 되어도 파셔들 맞기와서 그러와 내가 파셔들 미셈바 상보다 수수 펜섬께도 비고 돈 넘규도 빼지게 따는 따대호로지 이동화로 차는데 내가 가라라지 어디 통어도 내가 셈이야 가라라지 가지 제선 소화를 디기데 나도 디네요라 소수네 셈을 판배 삼로 따네 디식 삼다베네 동원 넘규디기 현라 가라라 셈 소화를 제투고로 제선 디네 삼다베 지시 땅에도 제선 셈비 토네 유와 땅고요 바디 세고 휴차고 두고 당하도 되네
I want to talk a little then about the meaning of meditation, the meaning of practice. So the word, so as I've already mentioned, Dharma practice or training refers to the mind. It may be expressed through speech or through physical behavior, but it's really talking about what you are doing with your mind. If one is engaging in Dharma practice, it depends on what's happening on your mind, whether one is or is not. Likewise, the term training, it refers to training the mind. And whether it is a Dharma practice or training in accordance with the Dharma is dependent whether the mind is becoming ever more virtuous, ever less non-virtuous. This is how one can tell whether the training or the practice is that of the Dharma or not. So this word, practice, it means to gain experience. So what we translate in English as practice, the Tibetan literally means to gain experience. So experience in the sense of how you experience something. So when you experience something, you experience it in your mind. That's a place of experience. And so this is the meaning of the word practice, to gain experience. As you practice something ever more, you gain ever more experience of it, which means it becomes ever stronger within you. So if one were to practice, say, love or compassion, one would gain ever more experience of love in your own mind. Your mind, the love in your own mind would become ever stronger. If one's practice of love for example, was weak, then one will have weak experience of love. When it arises, it won't have much strength or duration, and it will arise with difficulty, because one has limited or weak experience of love. But as one practices ever more, one gains ever more experience of love. In other words, one generates it again and again, so one becomes very habituated to it, and it starts to permeate one's mind, influence one's mind ever more. An additional word to talk about is that of meditation. So the one word meditation has, in English, two other synonyms. So meditation, habituation, or familiarization. Because meditation, whilst done usually with a particular posture, it refers to habituating the mind or familiarizing the mind to a particular way of thinking and breaking one's habituation or familiarization with an alternative way, the opposite way of thinking. This is the meaning of meditation. It's developing particular habitual mental habits or breaking particular mental habits. There are two types of meditation. One is analytical, and that's mostly what we talk about, and then there's placement. Analytical is where one is engaging in thinking, so analysis, reasoning. It's where the mind is active. Placement is where the mind is still, and there's no movement on the mind. Analytical is largely what one engages in, where we were talking about patience before, and before that generosity, and before that ethical restraint. These are all analytical meditations, where one analyzes, thinks. And it's through this process of analyzing, of thinking, that one is practicing, one is gaining experience of whatever the topic is: love, compassion, patience, ethics. Or one can say one is training the mind, practicing, gaining experience, meditation. So this is how the meaning of these words and how they all work together. And when one, to the extent one practices or trains the mind or meditates, one develops this habituation, this familiarization with particular wholesome ways of thinking, and breaks one's habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking. The time to do this is not only in formal settings like this or in one's daily practice, but because we think throughout the day, at every moment, we can recall just very briefly what one has been meditating on, make it fresh within. Because what we are trying to do is strengthen habituation to wholesome ways of thinking so that they permeate our day. And you'll have experience of this in meditation, where you feel, for example, love arising within, or if it's generosity, that sincere wish to give of oneself. That way of thinking we want to have permeating us throughout the day, hence the need to recall it. And to the extent these wholesome minds, we become ever more habituated to them, they will arise not only when we are alone, but when we're interacting with others. At first, in the more pleasant interactions with others. But later, as our habituation to these wholesome ways of thinking becomes ever deeper, it will arise in even more challenging situations with others. And others will start to recognize this within us. Perhaps someone who didn't get on with us before, who when they see us from a distance, a bit of apprehension arises. Slowly over time, as we start to change ourselves, the way we present physically will change. Perhaps our way of walking, certainly our facial expression. And those who got on with us will feel ever more drawn, ever closer to us. And those who used to be apprehensive towards us, they will start to let go of that apprehension. They'll start to trust us. And we can see how this works in that we know from people we meet, we judge their facial expression, and that is a guide. It's not infallible, but it's a guide to their mood. If their mood is good, they beam, they radiate a happy, joyous expression. If the mood is dark, we will feel that. So too, In the same way we can recognize it in others, others recognize it within us. And as we start to bring about deeper change within, our ability to have an impact on others, this will grow. And this all comes about in dependence on training our mind repeatedly over a sustained period in these various trainings that have been mentioned thus far. So there's plenty there to think about and to engage in meditation on. We spoke about ethical restraint, generosity, and patience. And then just a very final point to make. I want to just remind you all again that you, in the past, have created the causes that led you to make the decision to come here this weekend. And this is an incredible opportunity you have now embraced, an opportunity to cultivate these wholesome minds within, to become ever more habituated to them and more skilled in cultivating them so one can continue away from here too. So recognize that, rejoice in this wise decision that you have taken, rejoice in the opportunity that you have embraced, and recommit that through all the good qualities that are developed within myself, may I utilize them to bring ever more benefit in those that I directly engage with, and through them may I bring benefit to others too. And in this way, may I become an ever greater cause for good and for peace in our world. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.